Hey everybody, so we're going to try this because I know that the scan had a little, some of the sections were a little unclear to read. So I'll read it in this video, and if you read along, it's best that way. Don't just listen to it, you're going to get lost in the weeds of things. So read along as I'm reading from the book. I have it here, just the scans in my printer. Can't pick up the scene very well. So here we go. Your reading starts at the Ostend Manifesto of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay? Northerners who were horrified by slavery were roused to fury by two events in 1854, the publication of the so-called Ostend Manifesto and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The document known as the Ostend Manifesto was a message sent to the Secretary of State by three American diplomats who were meeting in Ostend, Belgium. President Franklin Pierce had been trying to purchase the island of Cuba from Spain, but Spain had refused the offer. The message from the diplomats urged the United States government to seize Cuba by force if Spain continued to refuse to sell the island. When the message leaked to the public, angry Northerners charged that Pierce's government wanted to grab Cuba in order to add another slave state to the Union. Early that same year, Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois introduced a bill in Congress that aroused an even greater furor, or passion. Douglas wanted to get a railroad built to California, and he thought the project was more likely to happen if Congress organized the Great Plains into Nebraska territory and opened the region to settlers. Because this territory lay north of the Missouri Compromise, Douglas's bill said nothing about slavery. But Southerners in Congress agreed to support the bill only if Douglas made a few changes, and those changes had far-reaching consequences. Douglas's final bill created two new territories, Kansas and Nebraska. It also scrapped the Missouri Compromise by leaving it up to the settlers themselves to vote on whether to permit slavery in the two territories. Douglas called this policy popular sovereignty, or rule by the people. So the people would vote if they want the territory to be free or the territory to have slavery. Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska Act hit the North like a thunderbolt. Once again, Northerners were haunted by nightmare visions of slavery marching across the plains. Douglas tried to calm their fears by saying that the climates of Kansas and Nebraska were not suited to slave labor. But when Northerners studied maps, they were not so sure. Newspaper editor Horace Greeley charged in the New York Tribune, quote, "The pretense of Douglas and Company that not even Kansas is to be made a slave state by his bill is a gag or a joke. Ask any Missourian what he thinks about it. The Kansas Territory is bounded in its entire length by Missouri, with a whole tier of slave counties leaning against it. Won't be a slave state? Gentlemen, don't lie anymore." Bloodshed in Kansas. After the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, settlers poured into Kansas. Most were peaceful farmers looking for fertile soil. Some settlers, however, moved to Kansas either to support or to oppose slavery. In the South, towns took up collections to send their young men to Kansas. In the North, abolitionists raised money to send weapons to anti-slavery settlers. Before long, Kansas had two competing governments, one for slavery and one against it. The struggle over slavery soon turned violent. On May 21st, 1856, pro-slavery settlers and, quote, border ruffians from Missouri invaded Lawrence, Kansas, the home of the anti-slavery government. The invaders burned a hotel, looted several homes, and tossed the presses of two abolitionist newspapers into the Kaw River. As the invaders left Lawrence, one of them boasted, quote, "Gentlemen, this is the happiest day of my life." The raid on Lawrence provoked a wave of outrage in the North. Money was quickly raised to replace the destroyed presses, and more, quote, free soilers, as the anti-slavery settlers were called, prepared to move to Kansas. Meanwhile, a fiery abolitionist named John Brown plotted his own revenge. 2 days after the Lawrence raid, Brown and 7 followers, including 4 of Brown's sons and his son-in-law, invaded the pro-slavery town of Potawatomi. There, they dragged 5 men they suspected of supporting slavery from their homes and hacked them to death with swords. Like crazy. Like, holy crap. So basically what's going on is Kansas and Nebraska were open for people to vote whether they were to be a slave state or a free state. What happened is Northerners sent people who wanted it to be a free state. They sent them to go flood and vote. Southerners sent people up to these areas to vote that it would be a slave state. And what ended up happening was this fight between these two groups, the pro-slavery group and the anti-slavery group. And then you have John Brown, who we're going to talk more about in the next lesson, come in and just hack them to death with swords. Like escalation. But it gets even worse. So just think of how messed up our government is when we read this section. So this one's called, this section is Violence in Congress. The violence in Kansas greatly disturbed Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. To Sumner, it was proof of what he had long suspected, that Senator Stephen Douglas had plotted with Southerners to make Kansas a slave state. In 1856, Sumner voiced his suspicions in a passionate speech entitled, quote, "The Crime Against Kansas," end quote. Using harsh, shocking language, Sumner described the crime against Kansas as a violent assault on innocent territory, quote, compelling it to the hateful embrace of slavery. He dismissed Douglas as a noisome or offensive squat and nameless animal. Sumner also heaped abuse on many Southerners, including the distinguished Senator Andrew P. Butler of South Carolina. Just what Sumner hoped to accomplish was not clear. However, copies of his speech were quickly printed up for distribution in the North. After reading it, New England poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow congratulated Sumner on the brave and noble speech you made, never to die out in the memories of men. Certainly it was not about to die out in the memories of enraged Southerners. 2 days after the speech, Senator Butler's nephew, South Carolina Representative Preston Brooks, attacked Sumner in the Senate, beating him with his cane until it broke in half. By the time other senators could pull Brooks away, Sumner had collapsed, unconscious, and bloody. Reactions to the attack on Sumner showed how badly divided the country had become. Many Southerners applauded Brooks for defending the honor of his family and the South. From across the South, supporters sent Brooks new canes to replace the one he had broken on Sumner's head. I'm not making this up. This is legitimately what happened. Most Northerners viewed the beating as another example of Southern brutality. In their eyes, Brooks was no better than the pro-slavery bullies who had attacked the good people of Lawrence. One Connecticut student was so upset that she wrote to Sumner about going to war, quote, "I don't think it is very much use to stay any longer in the high school," she wrote. Quote, "The boys would be better learning to hold muskets and the girls to make bullets." Things were getting tense, for sure. So now, use this reading to answer the questions about Kansas-Nebraska Act. I know it's complicated, so my follow-up video will try to explain things more. Hopefully that helped. Good luck.